Over the span of 7 terrifying weeks in the suburb of Frankston near Melbourne, there was a series of brutal murders. 3 young women aged 17, 18 and 22 all lost their lives, and a 41-year-old woman narrowly escaped an attack. This is part 1 of a 4-part series, but don't worry, they're all already uploaded and linked below so you can watch the whole thing without waiting. So Elizabeth Stevens had a bit of a difficult upbringing. Her parents separated when she was young, and Liz actually lived in children's homes from the age of 14 up until she turned 18 in October 1992. The day after her 18th birthday, Liz left the welfare home and moved to Adelaide to be with her mum, but unfortunately this didn't work out for Liz. So again she found herself looking for somewhere to live, and she decided to move to Melbourne to live with her auntie and uncle Rita and Paul Webster. They were more than happy to give Liz a permanent place to live. So in January of 1993, Liz moved to Warren, which was right next to Frankston in Melbourne southeast. By June of 1993, around 5 months after moving in with Rita and Paul, Liz had really settled into a new home. She had a small room, but she kept it very neat and tidy, and I think she just really appreciated the little things in life. But unfortunately, she did struggle to make friends in her new town, so she relied quite a bit on Auntie Rita to give her company. The pair would spend a fair bit of time together doing things like cooking and painting, and Rita really loved having Liz around. She was like the daughter she never had. But it wasn't long before all this would change. So June 11th, 1993 was like any other day in the Webster household. Rita and Paul got up early and went to work, and then Liz got up and decided she wanted to go to the library that day to finish an assignment for her TAFE course. Liz was super reliable and always made sure that Rita and Paul knew exactly where she was, so she wrote a note and left it on the bench saying she was going to be home at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. was quite late for Liz to get home, but she was really focused on her studies, so she really wanted to get her assignment done. When Rita and Paul got home from work, they had dinner before walking the dog down to the local shops. On their walk, they saw the bus that Liz should have been on, but it stopped at the bus stop and she didn't get off. The pair weren't overly concerned though, as they just thought that they didn't get the times right and she must be on another bus. What they didn't know though was Liz had actually made it to the bus stop at 7:15 that evening, much earlier than she'd predicted. When she got off the bus, it was raining heavily, it was freezing, and she was getting absolutely drenched from the downpour. She started walking home as fast as she could, but the rain was just getting heavier and heavier, and it made it really hard to see. Then out of absolutely nowhere, a man came up behind Liz and grabbed her. He was wearing a green army jacket and had a navy blue baseball cap on. Liz screamed, but no one in the area could hear her because the rain was so loud. The man put his hand over Liz's mouth and he held a gun up to her head. Liz tried really hard to fight this man off, but he was just too strong. He then shouted at Liz, "Shut up or I'll blow your head off." And just a side note here, the gun was actually fake, but Liz obviously didn't know that. The man then told Liz that they were going to take a walk, and he started leading her down the road. A couple of cars actually drove past them, but it was dark outside, so no one could see that Liz was being held against her will. Not only that, but when somebody did drive past, the man would grab her hand and make it look like they were innocently walking down the road together. The man then escorted Liz to Lloyd Park, which is a recreational area in Langwarrin that had things like tennis courts, footy oval, and bushland. By this point, Liz really needed to go to the toilet, so she asked the man if she could go, and he let her in the wooded area. When she was finished, the man asked her a few questions like what her name was and how old she was. Liz told the man that she was 17 years old when she was actually 18 because she wanted to appear younger in the hopes that he wouldn't hurt her. But unfortunately, this didn't help Liz. All of a sudden, the man grabbed her around the throat and started choking her. Liz tried so hard to fight back and put up a struggle for a couple of minutes, but the man was too strong and Liz eventually collapsed to the ground. The man then pulled a knife out of his pocket and started slashing her throat with it. The attack was so vicious that the blade of the knife actually bent. Although her throat had been slit and she was bleeding everywhere, Liz actually regained consciousness momentarily and tried to stand up to get away from her attacker. But the man just continued to attack Liz with his knife. He made cuts on her arms, hands, and face. Her top was ripped off in the struggle, and the man stamped his foot on her neck. He then stood back and just watched Liz bleed out for 5 full minutes, just waiting for her to die. After the 5 minutes, Liz was still alive, so the man walked back up to her and stamped his foot in her face so hard it broke her nose. After this final blow, 18-year-old Elizabeth Stevens passed away. The man then dragged her body to the creek bed in the bushes. As he dragged her, her bra lifted up, leaving the top half of her body completely visible. But this man still wasn't done attacking Liz. He took the blade of his knife and he cut her torso from her breast to her stomach. He made a crisscross pattern and then he stabbed her another 6 times. He then grabbed a tree branch and put it over her body and left the scene. He walked to his girlfriend's mother's house for dinner. He threw the knife into the bushes along the way, and when he got to the house, he just ate roast and soup like nothing happened. Back at home, Rita and Paul Webster were getting increasingly worried about Liz. But the library didn't close until 9 p.m, so they were just hoping that she lost track of time doing her assignment and she would be home soon. But at 10:30 p.m, Paul decided to get in his car and go for a drive around the streets looking for Liz. He drove to the Frankston TAFE, the library, and even the Macca's, but there was no sign of Liz anywhere. Rita stayed at the house just in case Liz came home, but she never did. So in the early hours of June 12th, 1993 at 1:10 a.m, Paul and Rita contacted police to officially report Liz missing. Police also became concerned about Liz as her disappearance was very out of character and they couldn't find any logical explanation for it. Later that morning, Paul got back in his car and drove around the Frankston area again, still looking for Liz. He didn't want to go to sleep because Liz wasn't home, and I can't imagine how awful that would have felt. Then at 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, June 12th, the Cranbourne police station received a call that a body had been found at Lloyd Park. A local man had gone to the park to find a branch for his wife as they were hosting a Christmas in July party and she was wanting it for a decoration, and then he stumbled across the body. And what is even more shocking about this is Rita and Paul's home actually backed onto the park. Police were immediately called to the scene. The weather was still awful, it was pouring with rain, and this meant that a lot of critical evidence was lost. An officer at the scene noticed that there was a striking resemblance between the picture he had seen of Elizabeth Stevens and the young female that lay in front of him. Investigators really struggled to understand what had happened to Liz. Her top was missing and her bra was pulled up around her neck, revealing her chest, but her track pants and runners were still on, so they didn't believe that a sexual assault had taken place. Paul Webster had actually been watching what was going on at Lloyd Park over his back fence. He had seen the police cars, the SES, and the CFA. By 8 p.m. that evening, an officer went over to Rita and Paul's home and informed them that they had found a young girl's body at the park. He couldn't confirm that it was Liz, but he did inform them that it was quite likely to be. The couple were in disbelief and they didn't want to believe that anything they were hearing was true. Investigators continued to work well into the night, trying to gather as much information from the scene as possible. It was freezing, raining, and it even hailed, but once all the information was gathered, the body was taken to the city morgue. The following day, a post-mortem examination was performed on the body. The cause of death was determined to be aspiration of blood and hemorrhage from stab wounds to the neck in a woman whose neck had been compressed. There were earrings and a watch that was found on the body, and these were taken to Rita and Paul's home to see if they belonged to Liz. They confirmed that they did belong to her, so Rita and Paul were asked to go to the morgue to formally identify the body. When they got there, the sheet was pulled back off the body just enough to reveal her face. It was confirmed that the body was that of Paul and Rita's 18-year-old niece, Elizabeth Stevens. Investigators appealed to the public for any information, and they got a lot of responses, but they also got a lot of conflicting responses. Some people say that they saw someone fitting Liz's description on the bus, but some people say she definitely wasn't on the bus. It seemed that investigators just couldn't get a clear idea of what happened to Liz that night. And that is where I'm going to leave Liz's case for now. We will discuss it again when we identify the killer. Part 2 is linked below, where we talk about Rosa Toth and Debbie Fream.